Could the Philadelphia Eagles be looking to add new kinds of roles to the offense and defense through the 2025 NFL Draft? We'll get into it coming up next right here on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome into this Friday edition of the show. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Coming up on this episode of Locked On Eagles, could the Eagles look to add specific roles, new roles to the offense and defense through the draft? Plus, how strong is this draft class? We'll compare it to some of the Eagles' top picks of the last few years. Where would they, coming out of college, rank in this year's class? Plus, I recap my decision in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft. That's all coming your way on today's edition of the show. Let's get into roles, though, first. And I think it's a good idea to want to add new types of players to the offense and defense every single year, to be dynamic, to have all kinds of players that can do different things, to be versatile, to differentiate themselves from other players on the team, to build almost a basketball team kind of roster where we have our point guard, we have our stretch four, we've got our big man center, we've got our sharp shooting guard. Like, it's okay to have guys with different strengths. I think it's actually a good thing. But I'll say at the same time, you can't get fixated on specific niche roles in the draft. Or if you're saying going into the draft, we have to have this kind of player at this position, that's when you get Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson in 2020. The Eagles went into that draft saying, no matter what, we have to come away with speed at the wide receiver position for Carson Wentz. And I think in a vacuum, that's a good approach. That was something they needed for Carson at the time. And in a toss-up between prospects, that could be a tiebreaker. You don't want to get hyper-focused on it, though, because that's when you reach, that's when you miss out on just overall the better prospect at a certain position. But at the same time, you could still want to add certain styles of player in some way through the draft, whether it's through the first round, the second round, or day 3 as well. For this year, I do think when you look at the Eagles' complete roster, it might be something that they're prioritizing and saying, hey, how do we stand out? How do we make this team even better this year? We have to add some different kinds of players because we already have talent all across the board, but maybe guys in this draft have certain strengths that we just don't have, certain roles, niche roles that could really take this 2025 team to the next level, right? And I think there are some of those styles of player that you could look to add in this year's draft that could be potentially, that style could be a tiebreaker in a toss-up debate between a couple prospects. There's 5 roles I think the Eagles could look to add to this team. Even if they already have some players, maybe they want to add more guys of this style or add a different type of role to both sides of the football. The first role that I want to get into is a positionless defender. This is something I think you could make the argument the Eagles do already have with Cooper DeJean. Cooper DeJean's a guy that played boundary corner the majority of his career at the University of Iowa, then moves over to nickel corner at the NFL level with the Eagles in his rookie year, was a Rookie of the Year finalist, one of the best rookie seasons we've seen in Philadelphia in some time. I think he's somebody that could play safety as well, could be a mismatch nightmare for opposing offenses that can go up against slot receivers, can guard tight ends as well. Like, that is Cooper DeJean. However, I don't think they really use him in that way. Like, they're going to use him as their primary nickel defender. I don't think he's going to be a roaming matchup-based player, and that's kind of what I'm describing here with a positionless defender. A guy that might not be, I'm not saying this is going to be your first round pick. Maybe it could be. Maybe it's a guy like Jahdae Barron out of the University of Texas that I think kind of meets this requirement of a safety, corner, nickel hybrid player that can wear a bunch of different hats. But maybe this guy isn't a full-time starter. He's a master of none, but a jack of all trades. That's more of a role player that you can add on day 2 or day 3 of this draft. Somebody that Vic Fangio can say every single week your role is going to be different, and we want you focusing on that kind of thing. We don't want you to, we're not planning on you being the long-term starting outside corner opposite Quinyon Mitchell. We're not planning on you being the full-time starting number 2 safety next to Reed Blankenship. We don't plan on you being the second linebacker next to Zach Bond. I can see them look to add in a role player style a versatile piece that can wear a bunch of different hats depending on the matchup. A positionless player, maybe he's a corner safety tweener. Maybe I would prefer more like a safety linebacker hybrid. Maybe it's more of an edge rusher stand-up linebacker hybrid. The richest version of that in this year's draft could be, Jalen Walker or Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. I don't think any of those 2 prospects for the Eagles are going to be in range on day 1, but like those kinds of players that sometimes are going to ask you to play as a pass rusher. Sometimes you're going to be a stand-up linebacker. As a safety, you can play in the box. Like you're going to be asked to do everything and anything depending on what each week that matchup presents. I think that's something I would really like to see the Eagles use or add to this roster that already has so many full-time starters. And again, you could use Cooper DeJean more and more in that way, but I think he's just going to be the nickel cornerback long-term. He's so elite already in that role that I think you're not really going to change it up. And in the slot, you're asked to do a lot. You will cover, star receivers like CeeDee Lamb that push inside. You'll be asked to cover like primary slot receivers. You'll be asked to cover tight ends at times and to run defend. Cooper DeJean's one of their best run defenders on the second and third level. But I'm talking about just like a matchup player, a jackal type that's almost like a sharpshooter in basketball off the bench. Like he has a defined role of just, he's not supposed to be a full-time player, almost like a sixth man of the year, kind of like a Jamal Crawford, if you will. You know what I'm saying? Like that kind of guy that you use, or like in soccer, I don't know what the role is called again, but the player that comes in with 10, 15 minutes to go that hasn't played all game and he's just your energizer bunny. A positionless matchup type of defender that's versatile would be a really cool player to add, I think, in this year's draft. Another thing I think they could look to add a new role on offense. It might be a new role because you're losing the guy that does this already for you at the tight end position. I'd love to add a run after the catch tight end, especially if Dallas Goedert is gone. And it doesn't have to be a tight end. You could talk about a run after the catch specialist at wide receiver, but a player that can turn, like a Deebo Samuel type, a Dallas Goedert type. That kind of guy where you can utilize him in the screen game more. Just simple, easy completions to get the ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands faster. That kind of player I would love to add to this offense. They already have guys that can do that. A.J. Brown in space, just get him the ball on a 5-yard comeback route, and he can turn that into a 20 to 30-yard play. So can Devontae Smith. So can Saquon Barkley. If Dallas Goedert's here, he could do that. But that kind of gadget player I would like to add on top of those guys, because this year I think that's an area of this offense they need to get better at compared to last year, is easy completions, run after the catch opportunities. They need more of that for their guys they already have, but it'd be nice to have somebody like that on this offense. That's his strength if we're going to add more emphasis to that this year, and especially if you lose Dallas Goedert. It's why I'm talking myself more and more into the idea of Harold Fannin, the tight end out of Bowling Green, in the second round. He's becoming a favorite of mine with that 64th overall selection. And another role I'd like to add on this offense, and again, it's not saying you don't already have players that can win in this way, but I'd like to add a deep threat specialist, a home run hitter at wide receiver. You have two of the most complete receivers, I think the two most complete receivers in the history of the franchise, in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, both very good deep threats, right? Two of the best in the league at creating 20-plus yard receptions downfield. And Jahan Dotson, we saw in the playoffs as well, and against the Jaguars and the Cowboys. He can be an explosive play receiver as well. But I'm talking about a guy that his defined role, maybe he's a little more undersized. Maybe you get him later on in this draft, like a Ricky White. He's a Quez Watkins type, where he's a 4.3 speed receiver, and he's really got just that, he's a sharpshooter off the bench, like I was talking about in basketball. Your job when you're on the field, go deep. Jalen Hurts is one of the best deep ball passers in the league. Adding another guy, another burner that has world-class speed to this offense. Again, they have explosive, dynamic playmakers at every position for Jalen Hurts, but adding that niche role of a deep threat, that's what he does best. That's what he is here to do. I like to add somebody like that as well to this receiver rotation. And then a couple more roles to add on defense, more closers. And this just means add more pass rushers. Howie Roseman, I was listening to the other day on the Todd McShay podcast, talked about in the NFL now, if you're going to score so many points like the league is, you need closers that in close games at the end. So many games in the NFL now are close. I mean, look at how close these playoff runs are. Look at how close all of these games are week after week. The NFL is so close from team number 1 to team 32. There's not a massive gap. Any given Sunday is a saying for a reason. You need more closers. Guys that, like Jalen Carter against the Rams. Yeah, you can't always stop these offenses from driving down the field, but on the 15-yard line, you need a Jalen Carter to close out the game on third down and get that big-time sack. Hassan Reddick was that closer for a while. So was Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox and Josh Sweat to a degree. Now, yes, you have Jalen Carter, you have Nolan Smith, but I think adding more guys that could be that closer, clutch, fourth down pass rushers, guys that came from big schools that made big plays in big games, like Jack Sawyer from Ohio State on day 2, day 3. I'd like to add a closing specialist like that in this year's draft. Just add more pass rushers that can step up in the clutch. And then another role to add to this roster, a unicorn. Just give me more unique players. In a draft like this, that's such an unknown, especially later on in the draft, add unique unicorns that you would always say are built in a lab, quote unquote. Like, this is what you want prototypically. Sometimes it works out, Jordan Mailata. Sometimes it doesn't, or doesn't feel like it's working out, Johnny Wilson. Sometimes they kind of work, a Jordan Davis. Add more unique players to the offense, to the defense, both sides of the ball. And I wouldn't say that's a new role because the Eagles do have players of that style on this roster, but I think it's a smart strategy when you get later on into drafts to add special unicorns. What I mean by that is just guys that you don't see very often. Like Jordan Davis was, 6'5", 6'6", 330 pounds coming out of Georgia, and he runs a sub 4'8", 4'9". Like, that's a unicorn. You don't see that very often or ever. Add special players, add special types of builds coming out of a draft. So those are 5 roles I like to see the Eagles kind of focus on this year. Positionless defenders, run after the catch tight ends, deep threat receivers, more closers, and I think some unicorns as well. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I want to get into the strength of this 2025 draft class. How good is it compared to past year's classes, compared to past Eagles picks? Where would past Eagles picks rank in this year's class at their respective positions? We'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Friday edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives business flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates will be there to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now. Post your job for free. That's Upwork, UPWORK.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. So I think the 2025 NFL draft is getting a bad narrative that it's a weak class. I would agree with that statement in certain ways. Like, I don't think this is a great wide receiver class. I don't think it's a great quarterback class, although you never know with quarterback. It might end up being an incredible class. I thought 2017 sucked, and Pat Mahomes came out of that one. I thought 2020 was underwhelming, and boom, here comes Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa. So you never know at quarterback, but it doesn't feel great at quarterback heading into this year's class. I think linebackers thin. There's positions that it's not great, but overall, I think it's deep. I think it's really good in the trenches. I just don't think there's certain positions that are an area of strength on paper, and I don't think it's as top heavy with like 10, 15 blue chip prospects like there have been in some past classes. It's tough to say there's like 15 blue chip prospects in any draft, but I'd say like 10 guys that feel like a blue chipper. In this year's class, I'd say there's, on paper, heading into the NFL level, there's 4. I think personally Cam Ward is that guy at quarterback. I would say it's Travis Hunter, it's Abdul Carter, and then it's Mason Graham, probably. Maybe Will Campbell, you could say. Like, there's probably 4 to 6 blue chippers in this class, and then Ashton Genty is one of them as well, and Tyler Warren. So, yeah, I would say like 5 to 7 blue chip prospects in this year's class. So I do think it's getting kind of a bad rap for being just naturally weaker. At some spots it is, but not for what the Eagles need. I think it's loaded with pass rushers. It's loaded with versatile offensive linemen. I think it's a really good secondary class. I think it's much better at safety this year and at cornerback. I really like this year's corner class. I mean, good corners come out every single year. So I do think it gets a bad rap in a way. How strong is it, though, heading into the draft compared to past classes? Like, if, let's say, for instance, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were in this year's class. Let's say Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith were in this year's class, or even like Jordan Davis, or, in recent years, your top 2-round picks. Where would they rank among other prospects at their position, right? Where would Nolan Smith rank among edge rushers, Jalen Carter among defensive tackles, Quinyon and Coop at cornerback in a pretty solid cornerback class? For me, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. And that's why I think this draft is getting a bad rap. Because, for instance, Nolan Smith, in this year's edge class, I liked Nolan Smith a lot coming out of Georgia. But compared to my rankings of prospects this year, I actually would have him 4th on this year's list. Abdul Carter, for me, would be number 1. You guys know what a fan of James Pierce I am. Like, I think he is worth a top 10 overall pick. His explosiveness is rare. Again, I'm not saying he's Von Miller coming out of Texas A&M. His other traits he's got to work on for sure, and off the field there are some questions. But just from a first-step explosiveness, bend perspective, of just speed getting to the quarterback, I mean, the guy runs like a 4.47. That's good for wide receivers, and that's your edge rusher. James Pierce, for me, is number 2. Mikael Williams, even coming out of Georgia, if he and Nolan Smith play together on that Bulldogs roster, I think based on just the prototypical build of Mikael Williams, I loved Nolan Smith's speed, his bend, his explosiveness, his run defense coming out. But I think I like Mikael Williams a little bit more. Their college tape, their college resume, not, of course, what we know now Nolan Smith is, which is a star. I would have had Nolan Smith probably 4th in these rankings. I think he's definitely ahead of Mike Green, Shamar Stewart, Donovan Azareku, Nick Scorton. I think he's ahead of those guys by a good amount. But I would probably, like, if I had my pick of the litter in this year's draft and Abdul Carter's on the board, James Pierce, Mikael Williams, and Nolan Smith would, coming out of Georgia, probably my 4th guy. When it comes to the defensive tackle group, Jalen Carter was a special generational player that only fell to number 9 because of off-the-field concerns. Jalen Carter, to me, would be ahead of Mason Graham, definitely ahead of Walter Nolan and any other defensive tackle prospect like Derek Harmon. Carter would definitely be DT1 in this year's class. But again, edge is deep, and I think Nolan would be like around 4th. And Jordan Davis, I think Jordan Davis would be like 3rd or 4th at defensive tackle. Jalen Carter would be 1. I would take Mason Graham number 2. Walter Nolan would be 3rd. For me, because I want a pass rushing specialist at defensive tackle, I'd probably take Derek Harmon over Jordan Davis, but I think Jordan Davis would be that next guy. So I think he would be like 4th or 5th. At cornerback, it's interesting. Corner's a good I like this year's class, and that's why the Eagles don't need corner, but you guys know me. I wouldn't be mad if they took a corner, and I like a lot of the prospects. Where would Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean rank among this year's prospects for me? I would have Quinyon number 2, only behind Travis Hunter if Hunter is going to be a full-time corner. If not, Quinyon's number. If we're removing Travis Hunter from this equation and talking about just pure full-time corners, I would say Quinyon's number 1. But let's say Travis Hunter's in there. He's number 1. Quinyon Mitchell will be number 2, ahead of Will Johnson out of Michigan. He would be my 3rd corner. I liked Cooper DeJean a lot coming out of Iowa, but knowing my initial evaluation of him coming out last year, I do think I would have ranked him, again, as a true boundary corner, if that's what we're talking about with him, because that's all he played at Iowa. As a player overall, if we're taking into account DeJean, what I projected to be at the next level, a versatile safety nickelback, I would have ranked him ahead of guys like Maxwell Hairston, Shavon Ravel as well. I would have put him ahead of those guys. He probably would have been 4th or 5th. But if we're talking as a true boundary corner, all of these guys coming out of school, I actually probably would have had Cooper DeJean probably like 6th or 7th. I would have had, just knowing what I like in a corner for the boundary, coming out of college, what their film showed me, I probably would have had him behind Trey Amos because of that length, because of that confidence, because of the contested catch, pass breakup ability. Maxwell Harriston's just top tier speed, sub 4.3. Shavon Ravel has the length and the athleticism that I really like for a press coverage corner. I think DeJean would have been like 6th or 7th if we're talking outside corners. Now, if we were taking into account his role would be what it was in Philly as a rookie, a nickel, more of a slot overhang defender, potentially a safety at the next level. As an overall player, then I would have ranked him ahead of Hairston, ahead of Ravel. I probably would have still had Amos ahead of him, so I would say he was probably 5th, but 6th or 7th for a boundary. So overall, that's good. Like this is a good class. On defense, I think it's a very strong class. I think it's weaker on offense. I think it's weaker at receiver. It's weaker at quarterback. But even like the offensive line's good. Tight end is really deep. Running back is an amazing class. So I do think 2025 is kind of getting a bad rap. I think this year, like, yeah, there's not the 10 plus blue chip prospects this year, but I think there's a lot of teams that are going to be very happy with who they draft starting next Thursday night. All right, guys, we'll wrap up today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special released yesterday. I'm going to recap my move and kind of get you inside my head, the logic that I made with my decision. We'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV 4K stick. What an incredible device. Did you know that your Fire TV and your 4K device, the stick too, the mobile stick, is actually an Xbox? That's right. Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles like EA Sports College Football 2025, Call of Duty Black Ops 6. As easily as you streamed your favorite shows, now gaming is made that simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost as a console. Already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take you or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, so make sure, if you haven't done it already, the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special released yesterday. We put a lot of hard work into this production. Shout out to our NFL team. Shout out to our production crew. We have a very talented family here at Locked On. Very proud to be a part of this. The specials are broken up into 4 different series, 4 different episodes. So my episode is posted on our channel. Make sure you check that out. So I decided to trade up from 32 to the 26th overall pick in this mock draft. If you haven't seen it already, I did make a trade up. I saw a lot of tight ends going off the board, 4 receivers, 2 safeties, cornerbacks were getting pushed up the board. Good trench players were falling. And I saw a guy that, for me, you guys heard me on yesterday's show say my draft dream for day one is for James Pierce out of Tennessee, the edge rusher, to fall into the Eagles' lap at 32. That's like my ultimate dream scenario, which played out for me last year. My dream was to get Quinyon Mitchell in the first round. The Eagles got Quinyon Mitchell. They didn't even have to trade up. That was something that I thought it was better than a dream. I didn't even think it was possible. This year, I think the Eagles' dream would be for a different pass rusher to fall to them, and he did. He fell within trade-up range. I traded a 3rd and 4th round pick to the Los Angeles Rams. I called up my guys over at Locked On Rams, gave them a 3 and a 4, moved up from 32 to 26 to select Georgia edge rusher Mikael Williams. I think, again, my dream would be James Pierce. If the Eagles could say, what's the best case scenario this year that's realistic? The realistic dream for us. What prospect could we get? Whether it's them falling to 32 or in a trade up, I personally think it wouldn't be James Pierce. Maybe it's Walter Nolan. I think Nolan would be a perfect player for this defense at defensive tackle. I think they would love the idea of Josh Simmons on this offensive line. I think their best case scenario, maybe they even like Malachi Starks or Nick Emenwari, but the best case scenario, I think, for the organization would be Mikael Williams. I think that would be their guy. If they have their pick of the litter that's realistic, obviously it'd be Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter if they had their pick of everybody. But of realistic options, Mikael Williams, I think, would be the Eagles' dream. And so I traded a 3 and a 4 to move up 6 spots to go get this guy and to have him be the replacement for Josh Sweat, to rotate through your top 3 are Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and Mikael Williams on the edge, and then Joshua Uche and Azeez Ojulari rotating in as your 4A, 4B. Mikael Williams is 6'5", 265 pounds, super high floor, super high motor, elite length for a pass rusher on the edge. He's a really good run defender. He's not a finished product as a pass rusher, but he's got a really high ceiling if he puts it all together. Bet on the traits. If you're betting on traits and upside like the Eagles have in years past, especially upside coming out of the University of Georgia, then Mikael Williams is your guy. It's worked out in past years. Try it again. And I think Mikael Williams, what I like about him too, is like his length, his size. I think he can win on the inside too. Like he can be, if you're trying to replace Milton Williams' elite pass rushing production next to Jalen Carter on the inside, I think in certain like NASCAR packages on 3rd down, if you're really in obvious 3rd and 5+ obvious passing situations, Mikael Williams is a guy that can rush on the inside like Brandon Graham did for years and years in Philadelphia. I think, talking about draft dreams yesterday, mine would be James Pierce. The Eagles, maybe it's Josh Simmons, maybe it's a guy like Walter Nolan or a Malachi Starks. I think it would be Mikael Williams, even over Jalen Walker. Like if the Eagles could say, we want one of these 2 Georgia pass rushers to fall, Jalen Walker and Mikael Williams, I think it's Williams because of the size, because of the run defense, because of the ceiling, because of the inside-out versatility. And he's just a really good kid. He's super young. Like he's got a long career ahead of him. I think he'd be their best case scenario. And he fell all the way to 26 in our Locked On mock draft special. I had to go up and get him. Only cost a 3 and a 4. Considering all the day 2 and day 3 picks the Eagles have coming up in the next few years, I thought it was absolutely worth it. So go check out that mock draft special on our YouTube channels and enjoy that before the NFL draft kicks off in just 6 days. That's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. Listen each and every day. Louie DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.